Okay, so we're all the way at the bottom of that Lamed Gimel on the base. I just want to make sure everyone could hear me. I'll do a quick test.
Yeah, I think we hear you.
Okay, good. Testing, testing.
Yeah.
Perfect. So it's not using my headphones, so I'm going to take them off. I was say. Okay. Dr. Helga Gemara, Dine Mominus. Anybody could be Malamed Schos or Choiv in Dine Mominus. Dr. Helga Gemara. Hakoil Bafilo Edim. Are you telling me even the Edim can weigh in with a svara? And I believe Rashi teaches Vafilo Edim Sheidu Alav. Edim that said testimony Yichoin Lamed Alav Ra'ayishos. Also, this is talking about the din nefashos in opposition to din momes, where everyone learns chus or chayv. By din nefashos, they could only learn, they could only suggest chus. Even the edim who say edus on him that he did something that's mechayiv and misa, even they could say a tiny of chus. Name masnisen Rabbi Yosy, Rabbi Yehudi. This seems to be consistent only with Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda and not the Rabbanon. The Tanya we learned, the Eid Echad lo yana benefesh. And the Eid Echad is not allowed to say anything about it. A person, we learn, means bein l'schus, bein l'choyva. So we learn that it's not stam, an Eid Echad is not Emon. We say an Eid Echad shouldn't, we learned that an Eid Echad shouldn't say, it shouldn't be Melamed Schus or Chayiv. He has no opinion other than his testimony on whether or not we should kill or not kill this accused. We will listen to the aid himself if he has a taina why his own subject shouldn't be killed. So Ebazoi, it seems like our Mishnah stims with Rabbi Yossi, but it does not stem with Rabbanan because Rabbanan says that the aide wouldn't be able to say any comment at all. When we're saying everybody is nemon to say schus, we're not referring to the aid. Because in fact, there is a machloikis between Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda and the Chachamim if the aid could say anything l'schus of the accused. We're talking about Echad min Talmidim, which Rashi says, Amar Papa, Hakoil Demasnis Lasu Talmidim, and Rashi says how it worked. Hayoshim Shurais Lefnei Hadeyonim, Kamar. We saw this once before, that in front of the Dayanim, there were rows of Talmidim that were sitting, I guess, to watch and to get Shimush. So if one of them has an opinion, that's what it means when the Mishnah says that they're nemon to say a schus and not a choiv. And this everybody agrees to. Sai the Chachamim and Sai Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, let's turn on to Amud Aleph. Okay, my time at Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. What is the svara of Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda? So now we're sort of going off on a tangent because we already said, the Papa already said that our Mishnah is not going according. Our Mishnah is not even discussing the Edim. The Mishnah is only discussing the Talmidim, but we do have a machlokes between Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon. If an aid is nemon to say schus, Zaktimor the Amarkra. The pasuk says, "Aid echad lo yana benefesh lamos." And that echad shouldn't say anything to condemn the nidain. Lamos hu de'ena aina aval schus aina. So that's why Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda held that an aid echad, even the aid that's saying testimony against this person, could come up with a svara to exonerate the same person. Rabbanan Amar, Shlokish, Rabban said in the Shlokish, Mishum de Mechsei Kinageya Veidusai. It looks like he's Nageya to his Edus. That's the reason why he could only say Schus and not Chayiv. So come on, Rabbanan, the Amri, Afilu l'Schus. Rabbanan hold, even l'Schus lo yana, you shouldn't say, Mishum de Nageya hu b'davar, because he's a Nageya b'davar. So the question is, why would I have an Agios to want to exonerate the fellow if I myself am saying testimony to condemn him? How am I Nageya? So Rashi, very interesting. I'm afraid that based on my testimony, this person might be condemned. And after this person is condemned, but before he's killed, the Yosy Edim Lazima. Now the accused will bring Edim to be Mazami. And I'm gonna be Mechuyev Misa. We had Behu, and I won't be able to be Chayzer anymore. Because you might ask, if you're worried that you might be Muzam, so just retract your Edus. Why should you start looking for Svaris to exonerate him? Just retract your Edus. Dr. Rashi, once it's Acha Kedibur, that option is no longer there for you. The Kivin Shehigid, Shuvei Nechayzer Magid. So therefore, the reason why you cannot trust an aid even to say schos is because he might be purposely trying to exonerate the victim of his testimony because he's afraid he'll be muzam and then he'll be in big trouble. Okay, so those are the two reasons why you wouldn't trust someone. I'm sorry, that's the one reason the Rabban holds. The Rabban holds that you wouldn't trust him because of the Negei B'Dor. So Rabbi Yosy holds you trust him for schus because the pasuk only says Erechad Leyana Lap V'Shlomos, but to save him, Erechad is no one. Rishlakish says in the name of the Rabban, Rishlakish explains the Rabbanon is because you're Negei B'Davar even to undo your edus. For Rabbanon Hai Lomos My Dor Shivei. L'maisa, the pasuk seems to indicate that we only don't listen to edim to say bad, but to say schus we would listen. They'll teach it that it's referring to Echad min Talmidim, which we know the Talmidim are never for schos, but not for chayv. Kiditanya, like we learned in the price. Omar Echad min Eidim, yesh li lelamed olav schos. What if one of the Eidim says, I have a svara to say that could shine a good light on this accused? Minayin she'ein shoym eloi. How do you know you don't listen to the Eidim at all? Talmud Leimer Eid Echad Lo Yana. Minayin LaEchad Min Talmidim Sha'amar Yesh Li Lamed Olav Chayva Minayin Shein Shoym Eloi. How do we know you don't listen to one of the Talmidim to say Chayv only? Talmud Leimer Echad Lo Yana B'Nefesh Lomos. So the way this brayso dashes the pasuk is exactly how we are explaining the sugya according to the Rabbanon, where the Eidim themselves are never believed to say anything silas chus silachoiv, and the Echad min Talmidim, the people in the spectators gallery, they will be neman only to say a dover shel schus, but not a dover shel chayv. Zok tehelig gemar weiter. Dinei nefashos hamalamed. Someone who during the deliberations wanted to say schus, we don't let him change his mind. And Rashi told us that that's only during the deliberations. We force him to remain in his position of schus, which will force him to, even if he has charata, from his original thought of schus, being that we're forcing him into that position, he'll constantly be working in his mind to find some justification to be mizaka this accused. But the Rashi tells us and introduces us to this Gemara. But right at the end, when the time comes to make a psak, to cast your vote, there the dayan, if he cannot find a schus and he feels it has to be chayv, at that point he can change his mind. During the deliberations, we do not let him change his mind. That's Rashi is quoting this Gemara here. Amarav l'shanu el b'shas masu mata. While the discussion is going on, that's where the dayan, whose initial thought was l'schus, has to maintain that position and continue to advocate for that position. But when it comes to casting your vote, it has to be al pi emes. Therefore, even a malamet schus can be chayzer umalamet chayv. That was the halacha of it. Now the Gemara attacks Rav with many different kashas. They say, L'mochros, the next day, and this is referring to Mishnah Adaf Mem, which means that if a bezin is going to condemn someone who's being tried for a chiv misa, if they condemn him, they never pass on that same day. They leave it for the next day. So what happens the next day? L'mochos the next day, mashkimin uboyin. They come early to bezin. Hamazaka omer. Those dayanim who had a position that he should be freed. Ani hamazaka. I had that position yesterday. Umizaka ani bimkoimi. And I still maintain, overnight, I didn't change my mind. I still maintain that I'm voting l'schus. Hamachayev omer. The Machayev says, Ani Amachayev. I yesterday was thinking to condemn this accused, and I maintained that position. The Machayev Ani bimkoimi. The Mishnah goes on. Hamalamed Chayva, someone who was Malamed Chayva, Malamed Schus. He could change his opinion today. Aval Hamalamed Schus, but the person who's being Malamed Schus, Eino Yochel Lachzer Malamed Chayva. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about the next day when they came to finalize the din, to vote their final decision. Gemar Dinu. And if it's the Gemar Din, then according to what Rav just said, we should allow them to change from Mechayev to Mizaka, or from Mizaka, we should allow them to change from Mizaka to Mechayev. Because that's what Rav said. It's only during the deliberations we don't allow someone who said schos to say chayiv. But now we're at the actual vote tally. So to Gemara, who said the next day there's no ongoing deliberations? Who said they go right to the vote? There surely is some more deliberations the next day before everyone puts in their final vote. Therefore, kikatani b'shas masu matan. This Mishnah, which does say that the person who said l'schus cannot change his mind, that means during the deliberations of the second day. But when it comes to the actual vote of the second day, avada the dain has to paskin kafi what he says now. Zok tehelige brisa. So we're going to have another kasha on Rav. So again, Rav said that b'shas masu matan, the person who said l'schus cannot change his mind. But when it comes down to the final vote, the dayan can change his mind from schus to chayiv. So Toshma, donen elu keneged elu, ad sheyira echad min amachayvin divrei hamezakin. They deliberate with each other, and the jury is discussing one against the other, as Rashi says. Donen elu keneged elu, heichad nechlechu bedin. If they had a split in the best. Shloshim v'shisha mechayvin. So this seems to be talking about a bezin of 71. There were 36 dayanim that were mechayev, shloshim v'chamisha mezakin, and 35 were mezaka. So there's a roiv of one to be mechayev, which we know is not enough. They need to have a majority of at least two. So how do we change it if they're deadlocked with a majority of one? They continue to have a debate until someone changes their mind. If one of the machayvin changes his mind, then we exonerate him. For some reason, the Mishnah doesn't even consider the option that one of the mezakin will change their mind and now create a roiv of three. Why not? If you hold like Rav, if you hold that at the Gemara Din itself, a dayan who was going to be mizaka can change his mind, so why doesn't the Mishnah consider that option as well? Either one of the mechayvin will change his mind to zakai, or maybe one of the mezakin will change his mind and see that he should be mechayiv. And then you'll have a majority of actually three. So Zok the Brisa inside. But that's not the only option. According to Rav, there'd be another option. It could be that one of the Mazakin would see and understand and appreciate and accept the Divrei HaMachayv. V'misa listening Nami Yipcha. According to Rav, that's a very real option. So why doesn't the Mishnah articulate it? Tana Schus Kamahader. The Tana is just trying to illustrate one example of what could happen. And if he's going to pick one of the two examples, of course, the Tana would rather pick an example where the accused is exonerated rather than when the accused is condemned. But Avad, according to Rav, that would be a real option. Okay, now we have so the second kasha we had on Rav, which we've answered. Now our third kasha. Toshma, Domer B'Yosy Bar Chanina, Echad min haTalmidim shezicha umeis. What happened if one of the Talmidim had a good svara to be mizaken, but he died, I guess, before the verdict? So the halacha is, when you're counting the votes, you look at him as if ki'ilu chai v'oimed b'mkoimai. You look at it as if he's alive, and he still registers his vote. How could that be possible? Nema ilu havakayim haderbe. We know, according to Rav, that at the last minute, when it comes to registering his vote, he could have changed his mind. So, why do we freeze his vote and say that he's Menamazakin? Why would we say that? He might have changed his mind. Zaktamar, true, but Lamaisa he didn't. Hashtamiya loy hadarbe. Lamaisa he was not chayzer, so we maintain his vote as a zakai. We heard from Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi says, how could you possibly say, Laha, Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina Karav? How could you say that this brisa that we just quoted from Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina, that if someone dies, and at that point that he died, he was thinking l'schus, we freeze his vote as l'schus, and we don't consider a change, and our Gemara wanted to say that that's not contradictory to Rav, because even though he could have changed his mind while he was alive, Lamaisa he didn't. How could you say that? Zokt Rashi, we got a message from Eretz Yisrael. There was a message sent to us that Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina could not possibly work together with Rav. Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina's halacha is inconsistent with Rav. The Yomar b'shas din Rav said b'shas din chayzel l'chayva, and that's inconsistent with Rav. So let's see the Gemara inside. It's not consistent with Rav. So here you're making a teretz and saying that since when he died, that's why you don't change. Well, really, he could have changed, but we had a message from Eretz Yisrael that Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina does not stim with Rav. So how could you say that he does stim with Rav? So Tamar, you didn't get the message right. It didn't say Divrei Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina moitzi mechlal Rabbeinu. It said Divrei Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina ein moitzi Divrei Rabbeinu. If you heard right, you would have seen that Rav is very consistent with Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina. As Rashi says, ein moitzi itmar hachashofalei. Divrei Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina ein moitzi mechlal Divrei Rav. It's not a contradiction to what Rav said. The time Rabbi Yosy mishum dahash tamiya lehadubei, just as the Gemara found. So the Gemara is going to ask another kasha on Rav. Somehow the Gemara is mamish bombarding Rav for saying that a dayan who says Zakai could never change his mind to go chayiv. So Rav says he could at the last minute. Toshma, Shnei Sefer Hadayonim. They were two secretaries, two stenographers at the Din Torah. Eindem Lofneim stood in front of the Bezdin. Echod min hayamin, v'echod min hasmoil. One was on the right side, one was on the left side. I'm not sure if that means physically or if that means ideologically, or maybe both. And they would write the words of the dayan, the svaris. They would actually record the different arguments that the dayanim were making, whether it was l'schus, whether it was l'chayv. Zok Gemara, b'shlomo divrei hamachayvim. I understand why they needed to record the svaris of those dayanim that were being mechayiv. Why? Because l'machar, when they come back the next day, should this fellow get condemned, and they're going to now wait to let the dayanim consider this overnight, we have to record this first in the Mechayim, because Lamocher Chazu Time Achrin. Tomorrow they might have a different svara. They might come up with a different svara to be mechayev. So today they have reason number one to be mechayev. Tomorrow they still might maintain that they want to be mechayev, but they might have aborted the reasoning that they had on the first day, and they might have a different reason. Now that they have a different reason, uboy lumevet halanas did. We would require leaving the entire over for a second night to a third day, because the purpose of Alonas Hadin is to make sure that the svara that you have, L'choiv, you're 100% sure this is the right svara. If on day two, one of the Diyonim changed his svara, even though the verdict is the same, but it's a different svara, now that svara needs a dika of overnight. So you'd have to add it to a second night. So therefore, it's important that the court has a record of what the svara of the Mechayvin were, because should the svara of the same dying change, even though the verdict remains the same, that would require that we wait another night. Why do we need a stenographer to record the svara of those that are saying zakai? My time, there's only one possible reason, and that is lav mishum the chazu time achrina l'chayva loy mashkechina behu. It must be so that if they come up with a svara the next day to be mechayev, we won't listen to it. And Rashi adds Gavalta. Eladivrei Mazakin, looking at Rashi, Eladivrei Mazakin, Im Isa the Yochalachsaboy. Rav, if you hold that you could be chayzer to go lechayiv the next day, if you can't go lechayiv even the next day, even at the verdict, that it's important why they wrote down that he was Mizaka, so that he can't change his mind. But according to you, he can change his mind anyway. So Zok Rashi, if a dayan who said Zakai on day one can change by the verdict and say Chayev on day two, why do we need to write down the reasoning of why he was Mazaka? If you're going to say because tomorrow, we learned on the second day, they also have some deliberations. And we know that Rav agrees that during the deliberations, even of the second day, the Mizaka can't say Chayev. But why do I need to write the reason? During the Maso Matan, we don't let him change his mind, only by the verdict. But if that's the case, then all we needed to know was that he was Mizaka on day one. We didn't need to record the reason why he was Mizaka. The fact that the stenographers have to record the reason why he was Mizaka tells us that it's not just about to prevent him from changing his mind on the second day. So then Lichtiv Ploy Nizika. All he had to write was, all the stenographer had to record was that dying number one on day number one said schus. Why did he have to write? Why did the stenographer have to record the reason for the schus? Time. There's only one reason why the stenographer on day one would have to record the reasoning as to why dying number one was Mizaka. And Lav, it's because if he wants to change his mind, we don't let him, even at the verdict. So why would that necessitate recording the reasoning? Zokrashi goinis. Hilchach boy lemichtav time. You would have to write the reason. You know why? So what we shouldn't forget, because if we forget the reason why he exonerated the day before, you know what he could have said? We learned yesterday that if someone makes a mistake in a Mufurish Pasuk, that is not considered a valid argument. So what are we going to do if this Dayan who wanted to exonerate on day one would change his mind on day two? How do we prevent him from doing it? Even if we don't let him change his mind, he might invalidate the svara that he had yesterday. You're not letting me change my mind because yesterday I said he's free. I made a garabatos yesterday. I made a mistake on the Mufurish Pasuk. And that will allow him to change his opinion, because that opinion from yesterday would be considered invalid. Because we said yesterday, an opinion based on a mistaken pasuk, that's not a valid opinion. So we need to record the reason why he said Zakai on day one. So we know that it's a valid reason, and then we wouldn't even let him change his mind on day 2. So, Frank the Gemara, from the fact that the stenographer has to record the reason for the mezakeh on day 1, is proof that he cannot change his mind even at the time of the verdict. So it's a kash on Rav. That's not the reason why the stenographer is recording the svar of why he was mezakeh on day 1. Rather, it's kedei shelo yoimru shnayim tam echad mishnei mikrois. You know what the problem is? The reason why we need to know each svara of why they're mezakeh is because if 2 people are mezakeh for a specific reason, and they're each quoting a different pasuk to prove that reason, then that's really only one opinion. It's not 2 opinions, and that would delete one of these 2 opinions. In other words, if 2 opinions are saying an opinion, and each one is saying that opinion based on quoting a different pasuk, we only consider that as one vote. And therefore, we need to know the reason why each dayan has been mezakeh to make sure that they're individual votes. This is a huge chiddush, where you actually combine votes into one. This was a shayla that Rabbi Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan. Amru shnayim, if 2 dayanim were voting and they had the same svara, tam echad, but mishnei mikrois, but from 2 different psukim, and the Gemara is going to give examples of halachas that one Tana holds you know this halacha from pasuk A, and one Tana holds you know this halacha from pasuk B, but it's the same halacha. So in such a case, we only consider that one vote. So again, Rabbi Asi asked Rabbi Yochanan, Amru shnayim tam echad mishnei mikrois mahu. Do we count them? Amr lei zok Rabbi Yochanan ein moinin lahen ala echad. They only get one vote out of that. So that's why it's important that we record the reason for everyone's vote, because we need to make sure that each reason stands as an independent opinion. As Rashi says, Ein moinin lahen ala echad, the chad v'hanach kroi lav l'hachiyasa. The svar is one of these 2 arguments must be faulty. It must be a mistake in the pasuk, because the Torah doesn't tell you the same thing with 2 different psukim. So obviously, one must be right, one must be wrong. You don't say elu ve'elu. So if one's right and one's wrong, one of these opinions is clearly ta in an item that the tzedakah agreed to. So it would be a completely invalid opinion. So therefore, the chad v'anachroy lav l'achiyasa, the kaim alon, we know lo nichtavu shnei mikrois latam echad, because Baruch Hu doesn't write 2 psukim for the same reason. Every pasuk has an independent reason. One of these opinions is surely mistaken, and therefore we don't count that opinion. Fascinating. So Zok to Gemara. I lost the place. Okay, so how do we know this halacha? This halacha that if 2 people quote a halacha and they each bring it from a different pasuk, how do we know we ignore one of them? The pasuk says, Achas diber elakim. So Baruch Hu spoke with one word, but shtayim zu shamaiti. I was able to hear 2 things out of the one thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke. He oiz le'elakim. So what do we learn from there? That mikra echad yoyte l'kama time. You could learn multiple halachas from one pasuk, but you're not going to learn one halacha from multiple psukim. Vein tam echad yoyte mikama mikrais. So therefore, if 2 people are learning the same halacha, one from one pasuk, one from the other pasuk, one of these 2 people must be taught in a pasuk. The very Bishmol Tana, Rabbi Shmuel said, it says in the pasuk, "Uchafatish yifoitz like a hammer sparks and breaks apart the stone. Ma patish zeh mischalek lakamen tzotzos." Just like the hammer breaks into multiple sparks, and of course, Tosfos asks, when you bang with a hammer on the rock breaks, not the hammer. So Tosfos has a different shot on this. Ma patish zeh mischalek lakamen tzotzos. Af mikra echad yoytze lakamatayim. One pasuk could be explained in multiple ways, but you'll never have 2 psukim telling us the same thing. So now the Gemara wants examples of something like this, where you have one halacha we have a machlekes which pasuk you learn it out of. Hey chidami tam echad mishnei mikrois. So what's an example of this? Omer abzvid kidetnan, like we learned in the Mishnah. Mizbeach mekadosh es haroyel. What happens if something's on the mizbeach and it's a possible carbon? If it was a carbon that was royal, but it became possible later on, like in Dazara, then once it's on the mizbeach, it remains on the mizbeach and it gets burned. You don't take it off. Anything that was royal to be a carbon, im Allah lo yered, if it's on the mizbeach, you don't take it off. Seemingly the same halacha, and he learns it from Shenemar ha'oila al moikta, ma'oila she ru'il ishim, just like the oila that royal to be burnt on the mizbeach if it didn't become possible. Im also like tered. Once it's on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. Afkol shu royal ishim im Allah lo yered. Rabbi Gamliel said, "Kol royal mizbeach im Allah lo yered." Anything that's royal for the mizbeach im Allah lo yered, not royal ishim, royal mizbeach. Af kosher royal mizbeach im Allah lo yered. Now, Zok to Gemara, at first glance, they both agree halacha l'maisa. V'tarvayu my kamarba. What are they trying to be marba? What do you leave on the mizbeach that you would otherwise think not to? That the Torah has to teach us you leave it on the mizbeach. Psulin, a korban that became possible. Mar ma'isila mimoita. And one mandamar learned Rabbi Shul learned it out of moita. Umar ma'isila mizbeach. And Rabbi Gamliel learned it from the word mizbeach. So you have a perfect example of their each learning the same halacha. One holds it from one pasuk, one holds it from the other pasuk. And it seems that you don't say in such a case, Eilu ve'eilu divrei likim chayim, because the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't use two psukim to teach us one halacha. So this is a perfect example of what we're talking about. Zok to Gemara, but that's not true, because the Hasa Miflik Pli, there's actually a machlokes lahalacha between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel. The Katani Seifa, Ein bein divrei Rabbi Gamliel or divrei Rabbi Yeshua, el hadam v'nesachim. Dam and nesachim, according to Rabbi Gamliel, it's royal mizbeach, but it's not royal ishim. Dam you spray on the mizbeach, but you don't burn it on the mizbeach normally. Rabbi Gamliel says since it's royal mizbeach, once it's on the mizbeach, you don't take it off. Rabbi Shua is only oil ishim. So this is not a machlokes about learning the same thing from two different psukim. This is a machlokes in Allah. Ella, we have to find another example of what we're saying. Elamar Papa Kidatanya. Rabbi Yosy says, "Mitoich shenemar," from the fact that it says. Now let's turn on Talmud Beis. Mitoich shenemar kol hanagei b'mizbeach yiktosh. Anything that touches the mizbeach is kodesh, which is the same halacha that psulin. Even if something's possible on the mizbech, you don't take it off. Shemei ani, I would understand from this pasuk, bein royu, bein she'ein royu. Even something that's not royu at all to be a carbon. Talmud loimer kvasim, it says later in the pasuk kvasim. Ma kvasim ruin, just like kvasim are royal in mizbeach, but they became psulim later. That's what remains on the mizbeach. Av kol royu, the items that we're saying remain on the mizbech, even though they become possible, are only something that was royal carbon. Rabbi Kiva argues in very secondly, and he says oila. We learn it from the word oila in the pasuk. Ma oila ru'uya, just like an oila is royal to be a carbon, I've called royal. And again, for tavayu my kabamatu pisuli. What are they being lemait? Psulim. They're both saying that psulim will stay on the mizbeach. I'm sorry. What type of items don't remain on the mizbeach? Something that was never royal to be a carbon in the first place. So oy bezoi, they're both agreeing, but mar ma'isi lo mikvasim, umar ma'isi lo me'oila. So you have again another example or another option to use an example of two people who use two different psukim to learn the same thing. So tomorrow note, once again, there's a machlokes halacha l'maisa. They're arguing about an oilus oif that was psula if you leave that on the mizbeach. Man the ma'aselo mikvasim. Rabbi Yosy he learned it from the word kvasim. Kvasim in aval oilus oif loy. Therefore, since the oilus oif that became possible is not doimel kvasim, if it became possible, you would not leave it on the mizbeach. Uman de Maisel Oila, but Rabbi Kiva learns that out of Oila, then I feel Oila Soif Nami. And Oila Soif is also an Oila. So there's a machlokes halacha l'maisa. So again, we need to find an example of an item where you have a machlokes where to learn the exact same halacha. Elamar Bashi Kiditanya. Dam yechoshev leishahu dam shafach l'rabbis is a. We're talking here about shchutei chutz. We know if someone shechs a carbon outside of the Beis Hamikdash, he is chayiv kares. Now, what happens if someone makes the zrikas hadam out of the Beis Hamikdash? Would that also be mechayiv from kares? So Kiditanya, in the pasuk of shchutei chutz, the pasuk says dam yechoshev leishahu dam shafach. We learn from there, l'rabbis esazayr. That also says that someone who does rikas chutz is chayiv kares. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Kiva Omer, it's from a different pasuk. It's the pasuk of oy zavach, which is in the parsha that talks directly about shchita. There we learn oy zavach l'rabbis esazayr. So they both are learning the exact same halacha. That someone who does rikas chutz is chayiv kares, and Rabbi Kiva learns it from one pasuk, and Rabbi Yishmael learns it from the other pasuk. What are they both talking about? The same halacha as Rika. Mar Maisila Midam Yechashev, which is an earlier pasuk. Umar Maisila Me'oizovach, and Rabbi Kiva learns it from the pasuk a little bit later. Zok Gemara, L'div Rabbi Shmuel. No, Zok Gemara. No, it's not fair. The Amar Rabbi said there's actually a machlokes lahalacha, so it's not a good example of a machlokes about where to learn the same halacha. You know what the machlokes is? Shachat v'zorak ikebenai. What if someone did shchita and zrika? He violated both. So if he violated b'mezid, it's not a question. He could only get curse once. But what if he violated b'shoige? B'behelamachas, he was shoichet b'chutz and zorik b'chutz. How many carbon chatzes does he have to bring? Are these separate violations, or are they just two ways of the same violation? Ika benayu is the nafkamina between them. According to Rabbi Shmuel, you would only be chayiv once. Why? Because according to Rabbi Shmuel, who learns it from the words of dam shofach, that's right in the parsha of shchita, and if it's right in the parsha of shchita, we combine the creases. The creases are when the Torah says you're chayiv kares. The Torah is speaking about both shchita and zrika. Therefore, we look at it as one category, and there's only one kares for it. But according to Rabbi Kiva, the Rabbi Kiva chayiv shtayim because it's a completely separate pasuk. There's a pasuk. The earlier pasuk says that you get kares, and that's speaking about shchita. And now the secondary pasuk that Rabbi Kiva learns from Oizovach is speaking with a separate chiv kares that the Torah expresses there that would be referring directly to zrikas chutz. So there's a huge nafkamina in where you learn the psukim from. The nafkamina would be if it's a separate violation or if it's a single violation. And if it's a separate violation, there'll be two chiv creases. Zok Gemara, that's not so. Because Itmar Allah, Amar Abaye, Aflo Diver Rabbi Kiva Nami Eine Chayv Alachas. Abaye taught us that even according to Rabbi Kiva, where the chi of kares is learned from a separate pasuk, so you might think it should have its own kares. Even Rabbi Kiva would agree that there's only one kares. You know why? The Yomer Kra Sham Tala Oilisecha V'Sham Tasa. There's a pasuk there that mixes them together. Arvinu Rachmana Lachulu Asiyos, and Rashi adds that there's only one lav. We know that any chayiv creatures you need in oinshin elam kain masirin. You need to have a lav, and then you have an oinish. So even though the Torah would have expressed a separate chayiv kares for zrika, there would have to be a separate lav for it. But in the lav that asers shchutei chutz, it's one lav that asers both shchutei chutz and zrikas chutz. So therefore, even if you have this separate pasuk about kares, it still would only have one kares. So at the end of the day, the Gemara is saying that Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel both agree that there's only one kares for shchita and zrika be'elamachas, yet they have different kares. So this is a good example of a chiyav misa, a chiyav kares, that there could be a machlokes which pasuk it is that teaches us that. And as the Gemara said on Amar Aleph, it's impossible that the Torah is telling us the same halacha with two different psukim. So one of these 2 days must be wrong. Again, I don't know how this fits in with the concept of Elu Elu Divra like Chaim. Rashi is telling us one must be a Torah because it's impossible that the Torah would tell us the same halacha from two different psukim. So with this conclusion, Rav's halacha stands, and Rav says even though during the deliberations a dayan who said zakai cannot change to chayiv, but at the verdict itself he could change to chayiv. Zogt Gemara weiter. Dina mamnis done b'yoyim. Dina mamnis, you start by day, but you can conclude at night. But dina nefashos, you must do only everything by day. Simen mishpat ma'ana mata. V'nana mili. How do we know this? Amar Abchi bar Papa. Amar Abchi bar Papa. The Amar Kra. And I can't control myself from stopping, even though it's so late, and just mentioning that today is the Yosy of the Rambam. The Rambam was a person who, besides the fact that he opened up the Torah to all of Klal Yisrael, he also was a big roife. And so we should be zoiche in the schus of the Rambam, his neshama is having aliyah, and should be poilers Yeshuas for Klal Yisrael. Right? Today is also a day that we have to celebrate that 3 hostages were freed, Baruch Hashem, that Hashem should help, that the rest of them should all be freed in good health. We should see bracha, and there's a new melech that's going to be anointed today. The Baruch Hashem should help that she should have only good things for Klal Yisrael, and it should bring only bracha for us. So Zok the Gemara, Dina Mamnish Dal B'Yoyim, Simen Mishpat Mana Mata. You know, immediately, how do we know that you can only done by day? Amar B'Chi bar Papa, Amar Kra, it says V'Shaftos Am B'Chol Eis. B'Chol Eis. I'm sorry. How do we know that by Dina Mamnish you can conclude the din at night? It says because it's V'Shaftos Am B'Chol Eis. Any time is good to do a din Torah. Any time works. Zok the Gemara, Ihachi Tchilas Dinami. Why do you have to start the din Torah by day? Start it by night. It says B'Chol Eis. So the Rava Rami. Ravi had a steer. And it also says when it's talking about a din Torah regarding Yerusha. So does it have to be done by day, or can it also be done by night? You need to start a din by day. You can finish it in that night. So our mission will not be consistent with Rav Meir. The Tanya Hayr Rav Meir Omer Mata B'Lemer Al PM Yia Kol Riv Kol Naga. It says that according to the words of Bezin should be Kol Riv V'Chol Naga. I believe that it says that Lagabi Kaihanim. Let's just look up the pasuk quickly. It says in the pasuk, V'nikshu HaKoyin B'nei Levi Ki Bom Bachar Hashem Alakecha L'Sharsai. And then it says, so it's talking about the Kahana. So, Frekter Meir, what does Negoyim have to do with Rivim with fights? Zokter Meir as follows: Elamakish Rivim LeNegoyim. We're comparing Machlekes and Choshen Mishpat to Kshalos of Negoyim. Ma Negoyim, just like Negoyim, B'Yoyim, you have to look only by day. The Kohen has to look at it by day. Af Rivim B'Yoyim, so to Dinim of Choshen Mishpat, you adjudicate by day. Uma Negoyim, Shaloi B'Sumin, just like Negoyim, a Kohen who's blind cannot look at a nega. So too a dayan must be able to see. And we also could learn things back from Rivim to Negoyim. Ma Rivim shaloi b'kroivim. Just like Rivim, a dayan cannot be a relative of one of the balai din. Af Negoyim shaloi b'kroivim. So too a kohen that's related, you cannot look at your nega. We know one kohen alone could pass on a nega, but why didn't you learn from Rivim that you need 3 dayanim? If we're merely making a ruling on your money, if you need 3 dayanim, if we're making a ruling on your goof, you're going to be locked up in jail. The Torah says beferish one kohen. It's very, very clear in the Torah that one kohen is enough. There was a blind person who was in the environs of Rabbi Yochanan. And he used to paskin. So there was a blind dayan. He was a blind dayan. And Rabbi Yochanan didn't protest, even though we have a Rabbi Meir who holds that a dayan cannot be blind. So Zok the Gemara, how could he have done this? Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say Allah Kistam Mishnah? Rabbi Yochanan says we pass like a Stam Mishnah. Utnan kol hakosher loden kosher lahoy. V'yesha kosher lahayid. There are those who could say edus vein kosher lot that cannot paskin. If someone's blind in one eye, he cannot paskin, even though he might be able to say edus. So, and this is a Stam Mishnah. So Rabbi Yochanan knows like a Stam Mishnah that a blind person can't be a dayan even on one eye. How is it that Rabbi Yochanan would allow this dayan to paskin? So maybe Rabbi Yochanan stomach chrisa ashkach. Rabbi Yochanan had another Stam Mishnah. He had another Stam Mishnah that says a blind person could be a dayan. What does it say? It says Dina Mamnus Don B'Yoim V'Goyim B'Layla. So the fact that you Goyim B'Layla means it doesn't matter if you can't see; it's dark. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan, this was a Stam Mishnah to paskin not like Rabbi Meir, but to paskin like Rabbanan. Frankly, my only the high stama. Why did he decide to paskin like the stama that paskins like the Rabbanan that allows a blind person to paskin? So there's two reasons. You have one Stam Mishnah that says like Rabbi Meir. You have another Stam Mishnah that goes like the Rabbanan. The Stam Mishnah that goes like the Rabbanan is going to be stronger because you have a right. Yes, there's two Stam Mishnayos, but the Stam Mishnah of Kalakosha Lodin is in Sanhedrin, where it's discussing that main subject matter. That carries more weight than the Stam Mishnah that's brought down in a different sugya that's only brought down the Agavorcha. So there's a svar that Rabbi Yochanan gave more credence to a Stam Mishnah that's in the main place where these types of halachas are discussed. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Reb Meir held that a blind person cannot say edus, and you cannot pass him by night, just like by a nega. So it says v'shaftus hamchalais. Meir holds that even though you're not going to look at a nega on a very cloudy, dreary day, but on an overcast day, but you are allowed to paskin 3 day on can paskin choshim mishpat even on a cloudy, overcast day. Ditnan and you're in the going shachis ubein arbayim. You're not allowed to look at a nega first thing in the morning when it's a little bit too dim. Ubein arbayim when it's a little too bright. V'loy b'sech habayis. You're not allowed to look at it inside the house. V'loy b'yamamunin and not on an overcast day. A weaker white looks like a brighter white, so he might aser, he might be mitama. Because he might be mitar or something that should be tummy. Frank Gemara, Reb Meir, of my Ovidlay. Reb Meir learns that the entire has to be by day because of a comparison between Riv and Nega. So what will he do? Use the pasuk of B'Yom Chilos Banav, which we use to say that you have to start the entire by day. What's Reb Meir going to do with that? This is needed for what Rabbi Bar Chanina said in front of Rab Nachman, as follows: You know when Yerusha's work, Yerusha works by day. Yerusha doesn't work at night. Omar late. So he asked him back. Rab Nachman asked Rabbi back, how could that be? Well, you say Yerusha doesn't work at night? So if someone dies at night, there's no Yerusha? How does that work? Dilma din nachlois kamrit. What you probably mean is din nachlois. That means there's a whole shiloh what it means, but I'll learn Rashi here, which is not Pashup Pshat, because there's a Rashbam and a Tosfos in Bava Basra that argue on this Rashi. But Rashi says something very innovative, that by Yom, if a person dies by day and the mace is saying what I want to happen, we don't need a bezin to paskin on that. That's gepaskint already. And then you just go take right away what the nifter said. But if the nifter is b'tav at night, then we can't allow people to take based on that. We need to aid him who witnessed this to go to a bezin, tell the bezin what the nifter said by day, and then the bezin will paskin by day. So maybe Dr. Nachman, maybe that's what you meant. The Tanya we learned, Ura kol parsha kula liyais din. We're treating nachlis like a din and choshen mishpat. It's not. We don't think it's a separate thing. It has the regular rules of choshen mishpat, which needs batedinim. Because you're Rabbi Marav, shloisha shenichlen to levakar shachayil. We had this in Bava Basra. 3 people that went in to be mevakar achayla, and the chayla was preparing for dying, and he's telling them what he wants to be done with his nechasim. And there's 3 of them there. So ratzu kaisvin. Either they could say we'll take on the role of Adam and will record what he said and will report it to a bezdin later, who will do the distribution, or ratzu oisin din, or they can just take based on what he said. They could be the bezdin to say this is what's going to happen. Shnayim Kaisin, there's only two of them, so they can't be a bezdin because there's only two and not three. Then Kaisin v'noisin din. They only have the option to be Edom. This only works by day. But if this happened by night, they could only record and not paskin because it's nighttime. They'll only be able to be Edom at night. Why? Because it's nighttime. They cannot be dayanim. And once they're Edom, now they can't say, okay, we have this information, we'll wait till tomorrow, and tomorrow will be dayanim, and we'll just paskin that this is the way it is. Because once they are designated as Eidim, which they work night, when Eid nasa dayin, and the Eid doesn't become a dayin, Amalei in. So Rabbi Bar Chanina answered him, Nachman, that's what I meant. I never meant that someone who dies at night, there won't be a Rusha. I meant exactly what you're telling us from Nachman. Okay, we'll stop here, Bez Hashem, and we will be Mamshech tomorrow.